Well, 30 years since Sony revolutionized the video games market with the launch of the PlayStation. Back then, the console was the underdog against established players such as Sega and Nintendo. But now, Sony's product practically dominates the gaming sphere. The PlayStation 2, released in 2000, went on to become the biggest-selling video game console in history. Now, as we await the next version of the PS5, the gaming industry is going through major changes with the advent of the cloud and AI. Competition is rife, with Nintendo and Microsoft looking to pull the industry in different directions. Bloomberg recently reported that Sony is in the early stages of developing a portable console for PS5 games to compete with Nintendo Switch in the portable gaming market. However, mobile gaming, which brings in the bulk of the industry's revenue each year, is today dominated by smartphones. Well, our next guest is the author of One Up, Creativity, Competition, and the Global Business of Video Games. Joost van Dreunen is also Adjunct Assistant Professor at NYU Stern School of Business and a startup advisor and investor. And he publishes a weekly newsletter on gaming, tech, and entertainment called the Super Use Playlist. Joost, good to have you with us. I know you have a cult following, and I wonder, how do you have any free time doing what you do on a daily basis? Now, we've been talking about how the Sony PlayStation has turned 30. Give us a sense of how, it managed to be so successful in the 90s against its rivals. What worked for it? How was it different?
That's an excellent question. Nintendo and Sega had cornered the market with toy-like games. It was very child-focused, and Sony elevated that by offering more mature and adult, games to play. So you have these much richer narratives that appeal to a much older demographic, and that was an instant hit. The PlayStation 2 they just announced has sold 160 million units over its lifetime, which makes it one of the best-selling console in the history of the industry. And so they just nailed this corner right away. And it was only until a few years later, in 2003, 2004, that we see Xbox kind of come into the industry and start competing with it. But they set the tone very differently. Gaming had stopped being a child's play pastime, and it became a more serious form of mainstream entertainment.
In its history of 30 years, what was its best decision? What was its worst?
Oh, its best decision. Let's start with the worst one, which was the price point for the PlayStation 3. They had gotten so comfortable with the success at that point that they just priced it too high, and they had to come full circle and sort of apologize formally and say, like, look, we priced it too high. And they haven't really done it since. They still stay at the upper echelon, but they have managed to really keep themselves a little bit more at bay. The best decision, I have to be honest, I think lately, you see some changes in management, you see some changes in its offering. I like very much the Portal personally. I think it's the kind of device that's grown up with a generation of gamers like myself. I'm Gen X, so I like to play my games, but I don't always have the time. And it's an ideal component for that. So I think that they're continuing to prove everybody that they can innovate. But the question is, of course, how do you navigate that space between, on the one hand, the hardware and the software on the other hand? And Sony is really proving itself capable of doing that.
Joost, before we pick up on the points that you mentioned, I'm just, curious. When you take a look at the console industry, Japan has pretty much led it. It's dominated that space for a very long time. Why do you think that is so?
Japan has a long history, of course, consumer electronics, very innovative, very long-standing history of just making great consumer electronics. What they also do is they have a close adjacency to the animation industry and sort of the cartoons, the anime that you see come out of the country. And so those two industries, they cross-pollinate really, really well, and they've been doing it for a long time. So you have this really just very innovative content coming out. It's not just Sony. Of course, here Nintendo is also a main player. You have to imagine, you see these weird little plumbers running around squashing turtles in a Nintendo game. Who comes up with this stuff? Where do they make it? Who does this? And so I think Japan is uniquely innovative and creative in that sense.
It is about portability, right? I know that Sony is working on a portable device to play the PS5, and I know Microsoft is also looking for some sort of the same thing. I mean, talk to us about how you envision the future to be.
So the industry historically goes through these oscillating tendencies where we focus on content and then we swing over and we focus on distribution. Content innovation tends to be the kind where we have new affordances in technology. We have better graphics cards, we have better processing chips, and so we can make things with more pixels and more spectacle. It then often swings over to distribution innovations where we figure out free-to-play monetization or digital distribution, and those then change, of course, the metrics by which we innovate and we advance the industry. So after the last 5 years, sort of roughly from the height of the pandemic to today, there's been this push into content, most notably with Microsoft acquiring Activision Blizzard for $70 billion a year ago. Those are examples of large-scale content innovations that push for economies of scale. And the pendulum is now switching back really to like a distribution innovation where we have to answer the question in a market where you have inflation, you have the possibility of tariffs, where people don't have as much purchasing power. How do you still engage and grow the market overall? And then suddenly we start to see expansions on the local global market where India now becomes a much more viable market. There's a lot of investment activity going on there, and of course then the switch to handheld devices. Nintendo is coming out with a Switch 2. Rumors have it that Microsoft is building a handheld device as well. Steam, a PC player, or Valve, I should say, they have the Steam Deck, which is another major one. And the Portal now from PlayStation is becoming sort of that fourth item in the category. And so you start to see then this transition away from sort of the standalone consoles to more handheld-based console gameplay. And it opens up a new market and it engages existing users. So it's a really exciting time in my mind.
You talk about exciting times. We know that the PlayStation shows the validity of Moore's Law, where, the technology will become cheap enough for home use. If you take it 10, 20, 30 years from here, how do you see this ending? How do you see this game playing out?
That's a good one. So in many ways, Moore's Law has been disproven in my mind, or at least in the games industry. Nintendo had incredible success with the Wii, and that wasn't because the Nintendo was the best, the fastest, most impressive piece of hardware. It was because the games were the most fun. They were the most accessible. I remember playing tennis with my mother-in-law and just getting beaten round after round, and it's just like a very new experience for someone like me. And so often what we see is where technology has this promise of better experiences because it has beefed up hardware. I think so many times in history have we seen where things are actually more fun when they don't rely on that technology to be at its peak. In fact, often it's unaffordable for a lot of people, and having just a fun, accessible, affordable experience goes a lot further in the industry. So my mind goes towards the future and thinking like, look, all this processing power will be helpful, but eventually we'll move into the cloud, we'll offload a lot of it. There are early indicators of younger audiences being largely indifferent to like the capacity of like the iPads, the tablets, the smartphones that you give them to play. They don't really care about the fastest and the best and the most powerful processing. They just want to have a good time. They want to socialize in online world. So we're going currently through this transition to a very different understanding of what it means to play with other people.
It's hard not to talk about gaming without talking about AI as well. I mean, do you see AI being adopted in gaming? How much pushback are you seeing in terms of, pushback from developers, for instance?
It's a good question. AI has been with the games industry for decades. Actually, it's one of the particular tech industries where AI has been, adopted years ago. Because making games isn't as easy as you think. If you think about film production or TV production, you're only dealing with a two-dimensional flat screen. You can have a cardboard house, and that serves as a set. In a game, you have to imagine a 3D rendered world where everything has to have a place. And so in that universe, things like AI are incredibly helpful in helping you figure out the bugs, helping you render textures, helping you make optimized calculations in whatever it is that's going on in these immersive environments. And so that alone has allowed generative AI sort of to be part and parcel of the game's experience. Procedural content where every time I boot up or arrive at a new planet, it's an entirely new setting. All of those things have been part and parcel of the games industry. What that really leaves us at the table is, of course, small and medium-sized developers that can really benefit from AI in terms of no longer needing an entire marketing team or no longer needing a full set of lawyers to go through some of the administrative stuff and focus more on what they do well, making great games. And I believe that on the higher end, the large studios will initially use AI to, of course, entertain their customers, but also look for efficiencies in their overall organization. Particularly in the last 2 years, where you see record layoffs in the games industry, a lot of emphasis goes towards making the production process, which is very tedious and very risky and very expensive, takes years, for instance, to use AI as a way to accelerate and really optimize that process. So in the short term, I'm moderately excited about it. What I'm really looking for on the longer horizon is, like, what are the use cases that AI afford us, and in terms of making interactive experiences that we haven't seen before.
So undoubtedly, though, the jobs market will be impacted, yeah?
The jobs market will always be impacted. It's the nature of the game. It's only now during a softer period and a flatter period in the industry that you start to see unionization really take root. For the longest time, we've had a lot of bad work practices in the games industry. That's the nature of the beast, but it's finally coming around to becoming a better place to work. More recognition, more equity, and so on. At the same time, of course, the technology will always be a driving force. So much of Microsoft and Sony's narrative has been, let's build better things that allow us to have 4K experiences. And when it comes to efficiencies and just the workload that comes in the end, you still need very senior, experienced developers that know how to manage all these things. Making games isn't just a simple writing of a song; it's writing an opera. Having all these different components work together at the same time. And that, I think, over time is going to never be really replaced by, it's a form of art, a very highbrow form of art, if I'm really honest about it, that can't be easily replaced by a large language model that just kind of guesses the best next thing to say.
Joost, before we go, just one final question. What's your favorite game? I'm not a gamer, so if I want to start, what should I start with?
Depending on if you have kids, but in your case, I would say play something mobile, like a Candy Crush or something in that order. But if you have children at home, I just finished playing It Takes Two, and it's a sort of collaborative gameplay. It's a lot of fun. You have a good time. It's very casual and lean back. So those are some examples I would give you for this holiday season, for instance.